Welcome to Dialogue on Public Issues. I'm John Chowning with Campbellsville University. Today, I'm very pleased to be introducing and interviewing two young men who have launched an organization called Anti-Racism Kentucky. These two gentlemen have known each other for a number of years since their college days at the University of Louisville, and both are leading two statewide organizations. My guests today are Dr. O.J. Oleka, the president of the Association of Independent Kentucky Colleges and Universities, and Mr. Terrence Sullivan, the newly appointed executive director of the Kentucky Commission on Human Rights. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks, John. Good to be with you.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Let me thank both of you because I know both of you are extremely busy. And both of you, by the way, congratulations in order to both of you for your recent appointments. OJ's been in his position for about 6 or 8 months now. And Terrence, you have just started your new position. So congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me start with you, Terrence, if I may. A little bit about your background prior to your current position, and then we'll go to OJ, and then we'll delve into the questions of the day.
Sure. Thanks again for having us on. I am Terrence Sullivan. I am from Madisonville in Western Kentucky, and I moved to Louisville in 2005 to go to U of L. From there, I went on to U of L's law school with a focus on getting into policy work and working on issues around poverty and justice and education. Following law school, I went to work at Louisville Metro Council in a district that is one of the poorest in the city and one of the poorest in the state, and worked on issues for people there, which led me to go work at LRC, the Legislative Research Commission in Frankfort for the General Assembly, where I was tasked with drafting and researching legislation for the representatives and senators. I left there with a mindset of doing more on the advocacy side of affecting change and being able to have a little bit of my own issues and ideals put into policy to help the people that I wanted to work with. So I worked for multiple advocacy organizations around issues with, again, education, poverty, and justice. And so that's how I ended up here at the Kentucky Commission on Human Rights. Now I am able to help with discrimination and issues that do arise from those areas that also lead to discrimination around the Commonwealth.
Okay, thank you. OJ?
John, again, thank you for having me on the show. Thank you for having Terrence and I. You may not know this, but you actually have a third guest. My 2-month-old daughter, Riley, is slightly out of shot. So if you or Terrence or any of the viewers see me dip off screen, it's to pay attention to her, because if I don't, then you'll hear a little bit more of her maybe than you would anticipate. But that actually is the end of the reason why I am here, because everything that I do and the things that I fight for and believe in are for my daughter and for her generation and the type of world that she's going to live in. But that's the next generation. My story starts with the previous generation and my father. My father grew up in abject poverty in a small village in Nigeria, John, as we've discussed on this very show before. And it was his experience getting a quality education in Nigeria, but also the higher education system in the United States through Wheaton College in Illinois, in Michigan State in Michigan, and ultimately becoming a dean at Kentucky State University here in Kentucky, that led me to believe two very important things. A quality education can be the ticket out of poverty, but also it's not guaranteed for everybody. And so what we've got to do, I think, as good citizens and people who care about others, is to create the opportunity as much as possible to provide that chance for people. And that's what I wanted to do as soon as I graduated from the University of Louisville. I had the chance to be student body president out there, and people say, when you get a role like that in college, you can go straight to the private sector, make a bunch of money, and do stuff for yourself. And they said, well, OJ, what do you want to do? I said, I want to go teach. I want to go teach low-income children because I saw the opportunity for my father that provided for me, for his children, and I want to do that for other families and other students. So that's what I did. I went to go teach middle school math in St. Louis, and I learned two more important things there, that it doesn't matter what your background is, who you are, where you come from, what you look like, or your zip code. If you have good quality educators in your life and your parents have good quality jobs, then those two things can help you effectively end poverty overnight. Now, again, as we understand, systems certainly play a role in this. Environments matter. What are the policies that allow those things to be true? And so I realized I wanted to get back to Kentucky, come on back home, and change some of those policies in a way that would be beneficial for the people in Kentucky. So that's what I did. I moved back to Kentucky, got involved in politics and policy, and had the chance to work for Kentucky State Treasurer Allison Ball as her communications director, and then ultimately her chief of staff. And in that role, I was able to work on financial literacy reform and opportunity for students so that kids all across Kentucky could have financial literacy as a graduation requirement. Because I think if you can understand how money moves and how money works, then hopefully you can be in a position to have a little bit more of it and to make it work for you, your family, and your community. And throughout that time, I was able to get an MBA along the way from Bellarmine University and also work towards my PhD. And after 4 years at Treasury, I thought, well, what else can I do to make a contribution to society? How else can I get involved and really try to tackle these issues of poverty and educational opportunity in a single way? And lo and behold, there was such an opportunity with the Association of Independent Kentucky Colleges and Universities. And that presidency opened up and I applied. And effectively what I said through the interview was, these are the things I want to focus on. I want to talk and explain the great work that our institutions are doing, all 18. Of course, Campbellsville University is one of them. And I want to make sure that the students who go to our institutions have every opportunity possible to get a good quality degree, because many people don't know this, but our institutions have 40% low income or first generation students. We graduate our students with typically less debt or manageable debt compared to our public brothers and sisters. And also we give them higher job prospects and they make more money on average than some of our friends in the public. So our institutions do a lot of great work. So I wanted to focus all those efforts into one single area. And it's been an incredible opportunity to be president of IQ these last 8 months. Again, no one asked me during the interview, how would you handle a global pandemic or situations of social unrest and race, but as leaders are wanting to do, they step up. And so we've been very blessed to have a wonderful team, 18 fantastic institutions that are working alongside the work, which led us to Anti-Racism Kentucky in terms of what Terrence and I were thinking about with our different paths. So I'm excited to be here with you, to be talking with you and with Terrence about the work that we're trying to do on that front.
You have mentioned the unrest that we have seen in recent months, some of it right here in Kentucky with the tragic death and murder of Breonna Taylor, the George Floyd situation in Minneapolis, the death of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, and others have brought about nationwide protest. The disparities of health care have been made even more evident by COVID-19, the pandemic. So obviously, the two of you have launched the initiative Anti-Racism Kentucky, which is the subject of this particular interview. And I wanted to zero in on that, the mission of the group, and what prompted the two of you to undertake what is no small task, obviously. And then the third part of that question, and I know I'm throwing a lot out, that's kind of my style. What kind of reception have you received since doing this? And Terrence, I'll come back to you, and then OJ can follow.
So the mission of Anti-Racism Kentucky is pretty straightforward. We hope it is pretty clear from the name, but what we want to do in our organization is, or coalition rather, is to propose and pass policies that essentially dissolve the remaining vestiges of institutional racism in Kentucky. And to your question of what prompted that reaction or starting this coalition, is we were prompted by monitoring everything that's going on and this feeling and need to do our part. And so we reached out to each other, and the text simply said, "We have to do something." And as two Black men who want nothing but the best for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, we wanted to leverage our own abilities and experience to try to make positive change. And the reception so far has been great. We've had a lot of questions, but everything has been pretty good on the reception that we've received. There have been questions about, is this a Democrat thing? Is this a Republican thing? But ultimately, we want to make sure that this is a nonpartisan coalition. And we've had a lot of energy around our efforts, and people have just been very motivated and eager to get involved.
Yeah, and Terrence touched on something that I think is really important to understand. This is a coalition. It's not a formal organization. It's not a 501c3. There's nothing wrong with, obviously, the associations or organizations who do this type of work that are, in fact, organized that way. But our thought was we wanted to lead people who were interested in playing a part somehow. They might be part of one of those organizations. They might just be individuals who are looking to learn. As Terrence said, we've gotten a lot of questions. Those come from folks who are genuinely interested in playing a deep level role. I've gotten questions just from friends that I've known as far back as middle school who have said, OJ, I didn't realize this was an issue. They were simply blind to it because it wasn't something that they experienced, and they've wanted to be a part of the coalition, again, simply to learn. And I think it's important for the viewers here to understand what we're talking about when we say institutional racism. Of course, if you hate somebody because of their skin, that's a hard issue. You can't necessarily legislate that out. But what does happen is that you have individuals who are involved in leadership roles in systems, if it's educational positions, if they're teachers, if they're principals, if they're nurses, if they're doctors, if they're attorneys, elected officials, or if they're loan officers, if they're compliance officers, whatever their job may be, they'll take that hate in their heart and they'll apply it to everybody that they hate. And so what happens is that you have a system in that regard made up of individuals who simply want to do harm to other people because of what they look like. And that finds itself, unfortunately, in the undergirdings of policy as it might be implemented over time. So what we're trying to do is root that type of thing out, figure out what policy can we reform, can we update, can we renew or put in its place that roots out those vestiges of the institutional aspect of racism.
Do you think that the recent attention that has been given to the deaths that I just mentioned earlier and the resulting protest, has that raised consciousness, do you think, of these problems? Obviously it has raised questions of policing and the need for reforms in that area of law enforcement and training and transparency and immunity and so on. But has it raised awareness, do you think, and concern for clearing up problems and transforming our institutions and solving problems of institutional racism? OJ?
I do think so. And I think that's important to understand how that might have come about. I mean, we're obviously in the middle of a pandemic. People were at home, either working or at home because due to the economy being shut down, they were out of work. So a lot of people had the chance to really kind of look at this stuff up close. Similarly, you had in the early 1960s when a lot of white America was first opened in terms of their eyes with regard to the Jim Crow laws and how Black people in the South or in the United States across the board weren't treated fairly. They saw police dogs attack peaceful protesters. They saw water hoses being used on peaceful protesters. In a similar way, white America all of America saw the different ways that a George Floyd might be treated when they're in the hands of people who do not represent all of law enforcement. Or you might see how Ahmaud Arbery was treated with regard to individual citizens who decided to take the law into their own hands because they don't like the way somebody looks. I think most Americans saw something like that and were disgusted. I think most Americans, most Kentuckians saw that and said, this isn't the country, this isn't the Commonwealth that I love. And so they wanted to do something. And a lot of folks don't know what to do, but they want to participate and get involved somehow. So I think that's what has opened the eyes of a lot of people to be involved in this process in some way, in a way that I think is healthy, in a way that I think is useful, and allows coalitions like Anti-Racism Kentucky to truly be across the board from political spectrum to race, zip code, and the rest.
Terrence, same question in general.
I want to second everything that OJ said, and I'm glad that he brought up the eyes that were placed on some of the incidents in the 60s, because I think now in our generation, social media has also influenced a generation of leaders that we are seeing step up in this moment and in this movement. And so there seems to be a growing space and willingness for activism and advocacy that's been captured in this moment. And people are more apt to use their voices and platforms to motivate others to be involved and to be aware. And we see this on social media sites all the time, where someone can create a trending hashtag or something just drawing attention to an issue. But on top of that, they then add in a place to join in and do your own type of advocacy for some type of issue that's happening. And so I think we can credit that, as well as the independent journalists who have now stepped out with a phone and will record what's going on. And every day they're capturing moments and sparking debates through their own commentary that creates a sense for people that, hey, I do have a say and I'm able to do more and do better, because there's this growing knowledge that we all have a voice and we all have a role that we can play in creating social change.
Certainly, you mentioned the independent journalist. The capture of the death of George Floyd is a classic moment that may be historical in nature in terms of change. Time will tell, but it certainly has captivated the nation at this point in time. OJ mentioned the civil rights movement. I lived during that time and witnessed, lived in the rural area, but witnessed on TV and read about the civil rights movement and all the changes that were occurring, the acts of Congress during the 1960s, and legislation. And to some extent, I think people of my generation, we felt like we had solved all the problems. And for 50 years, then we come and elect a Black American as president. Certainly a great moment in the history of the nation, whether one agreed with President Barack Obama or not ideologically. I think most Americans hopefully would acknowledge that it was a great moment for the nation in terms of the barrier being overcome. To the point of my question, but we still, 50 years after the civil rights movement, we still note the great disparities between Black Americans and white Americans in health, criminal justice, income and wealth, employment, education, and on goes the list. In 2020, and a part of the purpose of Anti-Racism Kentucky is to building a coalition to affect policies that will address institutional racism. But I think a part of the outcomes of that policy would be to overcome some of those disparities that I have cited. So what needs to be done? Let's just leave it here in Kentucky, but Kentucky to an extent reflects the rest of the nation in this area. What are some of the things that we need to do in Kentucky, Terrence, and then OJ?
Sure. So I think we need some definitive community investment with people in all communities to recognize what issues exist and our collective strength as individuals to address some of these issues. But I think from my perspective that the government should be pretty involved in how some of these issues are solved. And I say that because the government, through actions and policies that have happened over time, has played a key role in creating some of the problems that we need to address. And so by logic, it seems that the government also needs to be part of that solution. There are things that communities cannot solve on their own, where they may develop answers. They do need authority to take action and to then do something with those answers that they've created. Someone can't simply say, I think our community, or I think X needs to happen, and then there are policy levers that also need to be pulled in order to facilitate those solutions. Um, I think where we've faltered as a society at times is we we've risen up and come up with a multitude of ways for us to improve our communities and improve our lives, but that's where it stops. Someone might have a strong vision for what they feel is important and what needs to happen, but they then are met with roadblocks to actually installing some of those solutions that they've come up with. And so oftentimes officials will champion the concepts of communities doing what they can to uplift their own, but they're not also in turn providing some of that support by way of policy or capital to back up what needs to happen. And so I think one thing that needs to happen now is for people in positions of power, both government and just anyone in a position of power or influence, they seem right now it seems like they're grasping the concept that they need to be involved in the solution. And so what I think needs to happen or needs to be done is more facilitated conversation where we have decision makers and leaders in conversations, open, honest conversations with people who are on the ground doing the work and have met with members of their community to see and assess what needs to happen, and using those conversations to influence whatever they do coming out of that, because you have that collective and shared ownership of that solution, which creates buy-in across the whole spectrum.
Okay. OJ?
John, I want to harken back to what you were saying before with regard to the 60s and how your generation thought that they solved everything. There was something else that happened in the 60s as well, this idea of the moonshot. President Kennedy said we will go to the moon by the end of the decade, by 1969. And he said we choose to go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And in 1969, we finally got there. What did Neil Armstrong say? One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. I think with the election of Barack Obama, that was one small step for man. We felt good about it, as you mentioned, as a country. What we're still missing is the giant leap for mankind. What we're missing is this total understanding of how do we root out institutional racism as a concept, as an idea. And I think certainly there is a role for government to play with regard to unleashing the liberty that every American hasn't had the chance to feel, as every Kentuckian hasn't had the chance to feel. One of the chief responsibilities of government, federal or otherwise, is to make sure that every person, Black individuals in particular, because historically we have been left out of this, unfortunately, that they have the liberties that are given to them by their creator, by God. This idea of freedom, this idea of being able to pursue a livelihood, their own happiness, and that their life is protected and their life is valued. Specifically in Kentucky, I think that looks like some of the things that Terrence mentioned. It's having the access to capital. It's having a quality education. With Anti-Racism Kentucky, we've outlined 8 specific areas that we've got working groups and we want to talk about these issues very acutely. Agriculture is one of them, making sure that people have access to fresh food. There aren't food deserts in Black communities. Criminal justice reform, which we've obviously touched on already. Education, which we've touched on. Economic development, again, which we've touched on, but also in other aspects. Healthcare, which you mentioned, to make sure that people are getting healthy outcomes, that they have affordable health care, that they feel like they can go to a doctor and that doctor will listen to them when they mention the symptoms that they have. It's a common problem within the Black community that they aren't taken seriously with regard to their pain prescriptions. Another one is housing, that there's access to good housing for people, particularly in the urban communities, but otherwise with regard to the Black community. We want to make sure that people have access to generational wealth, that they're able to pass something on and along to their children and their families. A lot of that's rooted in a home that they might own or in a business that they might own, which again, because of redlining, this idea that there were specific communities that were cut out or kept out, lined in red, who wouldn't be given access to the capital, those are Black communities. There hasn't been access to that over time. And then finally, the workplace, that people can feel like they have access to opportunities. They can move up in their careers, that they see Black professionals who are at the top and at the height of their institutions or their companies where they work, and also who sit on the boards to make those types of decisions. So those broad areas are the areas where we think we can play a role within Kentucky. Again, it's not to assume that there aren't great people who are doing this work already, but I think, and Terrence, I don't want to speak for you, but with anti-racism in Kentucky, if we can pull these people together, if we can really come up with some clear ideas, some specific policy frameworks where local governments can play a role, state government can play a role, and private businesses can step up and lead. This is an opportunity where we really can get that giant leap forward for every Kentuckian who hasn't gotten that before.
One question I wanted to get to before we run out of time is white people understand the importance of the statement, Black Lives Matter. What does this mean? And how would you explain it to a non-Black person? Why is it of import to Black Americans in 2020? OJ?
Well, I think it's most important to understand that the statement itself, those three words, Black Lives Matter, really shouldn't be controversial. If you are an American, if you believe in our system of equality and justice, you should believe that every life matters. But historically in our country, that has not always meant Black lives. You can trace it back to our founding documents when we say all men were created equal. That was at the same time when we enslaved Africans. And so therefore, using the language all, unfortunately, hasn't always meant all in the context of our country. And look, I love the United States. My parents came here and immigrated here. They taught me to have a deep love for this country, and I do. But that means, though, I think that we have to look and be honest. We've only gone to war with ourselves one time over one issue in this country, and it was over the issue of whether or not Terrence and I had full value. It was 3/5 or it was 100%. And so when you look at the history of our nation, it's important to be explicit to say that Black lives matter, that Black lives have value. And different people have different takes on the full extent of that in terms of an organization that might use that or might be called it or whatever. But I think if you're white, if you're Black, if you're Hispanic, if you're Asian, whatever your ethnicity or color might be, to say that Black life has value, that Black lives matter, really shouldn't be that controversial at all.
Terrence?
Sure. I would just say that to me, it means that we as Americans and America itself needs to recognize and legitimize Black lives as humans and as equals, because for too long we've been recognized for our contributions to culture and entertainment, but never embraced fully as people. And so I think it's important to use that phrase to inspire and assure young Black kids that you matter even when society might seem to say otherwise. And so I think that's why it's very important to use that phrase to say, you know, we do exist and we are people and we're equal, and that we should embrace and embody that phrase in this time, because it's vital for our futures to recognize that we all should be treated equally and viewed as humans as well.
This may be our final question, depending on our time. What are your plans for Anti-Racism Kentucky? How can people look and find out more information about the organization or about the coalition? And what steps are you going to be taking in the near future? Terrence?
We are currently having conversations with the working groups. OJ mentioned the 8 issue areas that came out of our open survey, where we are now going through those issue areas and having conversations with our groups to put together some policy proposals that address institutional racism in Kentucky. And so we will then go to the legislature and local officials and say, these are some of the things that we've discovered could help. And for people who still want to be involved, they can find us on Facebook at the ARC Initiative and on Twitter at antiracismky. And you can also email us at antiracismky@gmail.com.
The last thing I'll add to this, John, is that whatever your political affiliation, don't look at these policy ideas from the lens of politics. Don't look at them from a partisan perspective. Look at them as a way to solve some long-standing issues that can build a better Kentucky.
And I might add that people need only look at the broadness of this coalition by looking at the track records of the two of you. And I mean that in a very positive manner, that you come from different political backgrounds and so on. And that's not to put you on the spot. It's simply to point out the coalition, the central coalition that this organization brings to the table. Do you plan on having an agenda for the 2021 legislative session, OJ?
Yes, we absolutely do. And again, as you pointed out, one of the benefits of Terrence and I knowing leadership in both parties in the General Assembly is that we've begun to float some of these ideas by them. Again, this is the idea that we want to come with a robust and honest framework on how we can get rid of some of these challenges that we've had with regard to institutional racism. So we will absolutely have an agenda, and I think it will be one that will be well received, again, based on the early conversations we've been having. And a lot of these folks are involved in the working groups in some way or another. So as Terrence said before, he is energized. I too am energized, and I think we're going to get a lot of good work done.
Terrence, this is probably the last question, very briefly and quickly. Are you hopeful that this moment in time is one that we will take advantage of to bring about needed change?
I am definitely hopeful and optimistic that we will take advantage of the times that we are in and have lasting and continued change.
Very good, gentlemen. Let me thank you, Dr. O.J. Oleka and Mr. Terrence Sullivan. Let me thank you both for your time, your efforts. Wish you well in your professional endeavors, and wish you Godspeed, certainly in what I consider a ministry as a pastor, and certainly an important mission with Anti-Racism Kentucky. Thank you very much. This is John Chowning for Dialogue on Public Issues, thanking our audience for being with us today. I encourage you to become involved in building a better Kentucky.